We always find the boat. That is the part I can never explain to the families. The boat comes back to us. We find it out in the open water of the basin, idling in a slow, lazy circle, the motor still running, the rod still in the holder, a thermos of coffee still warm in the cup holder, turning and turning on the black water like it is waiting for somebody to climb back aboard, except there is nowhere out there to climb down to. There is 40 feet of bayou under that boat, and 100 miles of cypress swamp around it, and no bank, no island, no log within reach. And there is no sign at all of the man who was driving it. I am a refuge ranger in the Atchafalaya Basin, the biggest river swamp in this country, down in the south of Louisiana. In 14 years I have pulled a lot of empty boats out of that water. I have never once pulled out the man who owned one. The swamp keeps those. And after the night I am about to tell you about, I finally understand what it is keeping them for. Let me get the small things out of the way fast, because I do not like to linger on the porch when there is weather coming, and there is weather coming in this one. If you would rather not miss the next account, then subscribe to the channel, and turn that little notification bell on, so you are riding in the boat with me the next time I push off into something like this, and tap that like button while you are at it. It costs you nothing, and it does more than you would believe to carry a story like this one out to the people who need to hear it. Then when you have a second, drop me a line down in the comments. Tell me where in this world you are sitting tonight, your town, your country, and what the hour is on your clock right now. I like to know how wide a story spreads in a single night, and how many of us are awake out here together while everybody else is sleeping easy. And I will be straight with you. I have done this a while, and I know good and well that your thumb has not touched that like button yet. So here is my deal. You press it now, before we leave the landing, and I will not say one more word about it once we are out on the water. Fair is fair. Go on and press it. There we go. Cast off. To understand any of this, you have to understand the basin, because the basin is not like any other wild place in this country, and the rules of the dry land do not hold out there. The Atchafalaya is a swamp the size of a small state, the largest river swamp in the United States. A vast flooded forest of bald cypress and tupelo gum draped in moss, laced through with bayous and canals and stretches of open water, all of it fed by the Mississippi when she runs high and drained by her when she runs low, so that the whole place breathes, rising and falling with the seasons. The water is black, stained dark as strong tea by the cypress, and you cannot see 1 inch below the surface of it. There are alligators in numbers a person from somewhere else would not believe. There are cottonmouths thick as your arm. There are stretches of that swamp where a man could disappear 10 feet off the main channel and never be found. Not in 100 years, because the water keeps its own counsel and the swamp closes over a thing like a mouth. My name is Émile. My people are Thibodeau, and we have fished and trapped this basin for longer than anybody kept the records that would say how long. I grew up in a camp on stilts out on one of the bayous, with no power but a generator and no road but the water. And I knew how to run a pirogue before I knew how to ride a bicycle. I left for a while, the way you do, tried the dry land and the cities, and the dry land did not want me, and I did not want it. I came home. The wildlife refuge needed officers who could run the basin in any weather, day or night, who would not get lost out there and would not panic. And there are not many of those because most people who can do it are out fishing it for money, not patrolling it for a salary. I could do it, and I loved it. And so I took the badge, and the basin took me back the way it always had. The job is its own thing. I patrol by boat, a flat aluminum hull with a mud motor for the shallows and an outboard for the runs. I check fishing and hunting licenses. I watch for poachers running gator lines out of season. I keep an eye on the oil and gas crews that have canals cut all through the basin. And when somebody does not come back from the water, I am the one they call. Search and rescue in the Atchafalaya is unlike search and rescue anywhere else, because the basin does not give a body back the way the land does. On land, the lost stay where they fell, and the dogs and the helicopters find them. In the basin, the water moves, the gators come, and a man who goes under is gone, most times for good. I have made my peace with that. It is the toll the swamp takes. And I have hauled out enough drowned fishermen and capsized hunters over the years to think I had seen the whole catalog of ways this place can kill a person. I had not. That is the thing I have had to learn. There was a whole chapter of it I had never read, and an old man and a young one taught it to me in the same terrible week. It started in the high heat of late summer, the kind of August in South Louisiana where the air sits on you like a wet wool blanket and the swamp at noon goes still and heavy and silent under the sun. A young crawfisherman went missing out on the far side of the basin, in a maze of bayous where almost nobody runs except the men who have fished it their whole lives. His name was Lonnie Naquin. He was 24, and he came from one of the old basin families the same as me, and he had been running crawfish traps out of a small aluminum boat since he was a boy. He knew that water, that is the first thing every one of these stories has in common, and it is the thing that should have told me sooner what I was dealing with. The basin does not generally take the men who know it. It takes the tourists, the drunks, the careless. It does not take a Naquin who has run those same traps every dawn for 10 years. But Lonnie Naquin did not come back one morning, and by that afternoon they had found his boat. They found it exactly the way I told you at the start, out in a stretch of open water between two cypress breaks, idling in a slow circle, the little outboard still running on the last of its gas, his traps still stacked in the bow, his lunch still in the cooler, his cap floating in the bilge water in the bottom of the hull. No Lonnie. No blood. No sign of a struggle. No sign of a gator. No sign of anything but a man who had simply stopped existing between one trap and the next, on flat calm water, in the full light of a August morning, within sight of camps where other men were drinking their coffee. The call came to me because it was Refuge water, and because I knew the family. Lonnie Naquin was the nephew of a man named Roy Naquin, and Roy was about the best swamper left alive in that part of the basin, a lean, leathery old Cajun past 70 who had forgotten more about that water than the rest of us would ever learn. Roy rolled his own cigarettes and smoked them down to nothing, and he was missing most of his back teeth, and he talked to the swamp under his breath the way some men talk to a dog, low and constant, a running murmur in French and English both. Roy had half-raised Lonnie after the boy's father passed, and when I came to the landing that first evening, Roy was already there, sitting on the tailgate of his truck, not crying, just staring out at the water with a stillness that was worse than crying. And he looked at me when I walked up and he said, "Before I could say one word of the things you say," he said, "you are going to want to call it a drowning, Émile. Do not call it a drowning, not yet. You come out with me in the morning, and you keep your mouth shut, and you look at what I show you, and then you call it whatever you got the stomach to call it." I did not know what to say to that, so I said I would come. That night, before I went home to sleep what little I could, I did a thing I had not done in years. I drove out the long way, past the edge of the basin, to a little house at the end of a shell road where an old woman lived, a woman my grandmother had known. Her name was Odile, and she was a traiteur, which is our word for a kind of folk healer, the old French Catholic kind we still have down here, who treats burns and warts and the troubles you do not take to a hospital, with prayers and laying on of hands. I do not know fully why I went to her. I think Roy's stillness had put a fear in me that did not have a name yet, and I wanted somebody older and closer to the old ways to tell me I was being a fool. Tante Odile was on her porch in the heavy night air, and she let me sit, and I told her a Naquin boy had gone off his boat out in the deep basin and left no trace. She was quiet a long time, rocking. Then she asked me one question. She asked me had the boy been good to the water. Had he taken more than he needed, fouled it, run it hard, disrespected it? I told her no. That Lonnie was a good boy, a careful fisherman, an old family, and Odile nodded slowly, and she said a thing that did not comfort me at all. She said, then it did not take him for spite. It took him because it wanted him. That is worse, Chair. The first kind, you can make right. The second kind, and she did not finish it. She crossed herself, and she would say no more about it that night except one last thing, as I was leaving, that I did not understand until much later. She said, when you go out there, you mind the sounds. The swamp, she has her own voice. Day and night, you know it like your own breathing. When her voice goes wrong, when the night birds and the frogs all hush at once and something starts up that you do not know, that is it putting on a new skin to come close. You do not answer, you do not go to it. You come on home. And then she went inside, and left me standing in the heavy black night with the frogs roaring all around, listening to the swamp's voice and praying it would not go wrong. I want to stop us right here, on the landing, in the last calm before I pushed the boat off into the rest of this. Because once Roy and I get out on that water in the morning, it does not let up. So if this story has its hooks in you, take the 1 second it costs to like this video and to subscribe to the channel so the next person can find their way out here the same as you did. It is the small, dry, easy thing, done while you are still safe on the bank. Almost nobody in this story got to do the small, easy thing in time. You can do it now. I did not sleep much. Before first light, I met Roy knocking at the landing, and we loaded into my boat, and we pushed off into the gray, into the mist that lay on the black water like smoke, and Roy guided me with a low murmur and a pointed finger, deeper and deeper into the part of the basin where his nephew had run his traps, where the cypress grew so thick and old that the canopy closed overhead and the morning stayed a green twilight down on the water, and the camps fell away behind us, and the cell signal died, and it was just the two of us and the swamp and the slow black water, going to look at the thing Roy could not bring himself to name on dry land. Roy took me first to the place where they had found Lonnie's boat. It was a wide stretch of open water, a flooded clearing in the cypress maybe 200 yards across, ringed by the gray trunks and their knees rising up out of the water like teeth. It was a pretty place in the early light, mist still curling off the surface, a heron standing in the shallows on the far side. An ordinary, beautiful piece of basin, and Roy cut my motor a good way out from it and let us drift. And he sat there in the bow looking at that clearing with his jaw working, and he would not go into it. I asked him what we were looking for. He did not answer right away. He pointed, instead, to the cypress at the near edge of the clearing, and he told me to take us slow along the tree line. The trolling motor only. No gas. So I did, and as we eased along the edge of that clearing, in under the moss, Roy began to show me the things he had come to show me, and one by one they took the bottom out of everything I thought I knew about my own swamp. The first thing was the claw marks. High up on the cypress trunks, at the waterline edge of the clearing, there were gouges in the bark, deep ones, 4 parallel lines, the way a gator will mark a tree, except a gator does not climb, and these were 6 feet up the trunk, and 8, and on one tree they ran up past 10 feet, far above where any gator in that swamp could reach from the water. Roy put his hand flat against one set, and his hand, a big swamper's hand, did not span the width between the outer 2 grooves. Whatever had cut them had a paw, or a hand, half again the width of his. The second thing was the nutria. Nutria are the big swamp rats. Everywhere in the basin, the main food of the gators. Roy took us into a little side slough off the clearing, and there, on a half-sunk log, were nutria. 4 of them, dead, and they had not been eaten. They had been laid out, in a row, on the log, side by side, evenly spaced, their bodies arranged with a care that no predator has, because a predator eats its kill or caches it sloppy, and these were placed, displayed, the way you would line up tools on a bench, and they had been opened up in a way I am not going to describe in full, except to say that it was done with a precision that turned my stomach, and that it was not the work of any animal that lives in that swamp, or any I have heard of. The third thing was the smell. We came around a screen of cypress into a narrow dead-end bayou, and the smell hit us both at once, rolling out over the water, and it stopped Roy's low murmur cold for the first time all morning. It was a heavy, rank, musky stench, like a wet dog and a dead thing and something under both of them that I have no word for. And it sat in that dead-end bayou with no breeze to move it, thick enough to taste. And Roy reached back without looking and gripped my arm and turned us around right there. And we got out of that bayou fast, and once we were back in moving air he let out a breath and said, "Lo, that is its bed, one of them. It lays up in the heat of the day in a place like that, in the deep shade, in the still air, where the smell cannot carry to give it away. We do not go in there, not in the day, not ever." I asked him, finally, the question I had been holding all morning. I asked him what it was. Roy Nacken was quiet a long while, easing us along the black water. Then he said the only real piece of explaining anyone ever gave me, and it was not much, and he did not pretend it was. He said his grandfather had called it by an old name, a swamp name, that he was not going to say out loud out here on its water. He said it was not a gator and not a bear and not a man, though it could move in the water like the first and stand up tall as the second, and was cunning as the third and worse. He said it did not live in the basin so much as the basin was the thing it lived inside of, the way a spider lives inside its web, and that it had been here before the Nakins and the Thibodeau and the rest of us, and would be here after. He said it did not take many, one a year, maybe less, sometimes none for a long stretch, so that men forgot, so that it became a story old swampers told and young ones laughed at. And he said it almost never took a swamper, one of the old families, one who knew and respected the water, and that this was the thing that had him so afraid, because it had taken Lonnie, who knew that water as well as any man alive, and that meant the rules had changed, or that it had wanted Lonnie in particular, the way O'Dale had said, and Roy did not know which was worse. I asked him how he knew so much about a thing he would not name, and Roy Nacken looked at me with his old creek-colored eyes, and he said, "Because I saw it take my brother Émile, Lonnie's daddy, 40 years ago, off the back of a boat I was sitting in, on water as calm as glass. I have been waiting 40 years for it to come back around the family. And now it has." And that was all he would say, and the morning had gone hot and bright and ordinary around us. The swamp's voice loud with insects and birds, and I would have given anything to believe that Roy Nacken was a grieving old man telling himself a story, except that I had put my own hand in those claw marks, and I had smelled that bed, and I had seen those nutria laid out in their row, and no story I knew could account for any of it. We worked the basin the rest of that day, looking for any sign of Lonnie himself, finding none. And as the afternoon wore on toward evening, I made the decision that I have gone over 1,000 times since. The right call, the procedure call, would have been to take Roy back to the landing at dusk and bring a full team out the next day, in numbers in daylight, and to keep every boat off that water at night. But Roy would not hear of leaving. He believed, he told me, that the thing kept what it took, for a while, alive, in a place, before whatever it did at the end, and that there was a chance, a small one, that Lonnie was still somewhere out in that maze, and that one more night might be the difference. I did not fully believe it, but I could not put my hand on the throttle and run for the landing and leave a Naquin out there on the strength of my own doubt, with the boy's uncle begging me to look. So I made the wrong call, the human one. We stayed out. We would run the deep bayous in the last of the light, calling for Lonnie, and be off the water by full night. We did not make it off the water by full night. The basin is a maze, and the evening comes fast under that canopy, and we were deep in it when the light began to fail, miles from the landing through 100 wrong turns, and I made the second hard call, which was that running those bayous at speed in the night was more likely to kill us on a stump or a log than anything else was, and that we would tie off to a cypress in a sheltered spot, wait out the night, and run for home at first light. Roy agreed. We found a good spot, a small clearing with deep water and a big old cypress to tie to, and we settled in, and I let the boat swing on its line, and the night came down over the basin, and for a few hours it was only the basin, the ordinary swamp at night, which is one of the loudest places on this earth, a wall of sound, frogs by the million, insects, the grunt and bellow of gators off in the breaks, the cry of a night heron, the whole black flooded forest singing its song that I have known since before I could walk. I lay back against my pack with my hand on the spotlight, and I listened to it, and it was almost a comfort, that loud familiar voice, and I let myself believe we would be all right until morning. It was somewhere in the deep middle of the night that Tante Odille's warning came true, and the swamp's voice went wrong. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way a room goes quiet when one person after another stops talking. First the frogs near us hushed, then the insects, then the further frogs, and the gators, and the night birds, in a spreading ring of silence that moved out from somewhere across the water and swallowed the whole roaring voice of the swamp, until there was nothing left but the drip of water off the moss, and the small slap of the hull, and Roy Naquin's breathing in the bow, which had gone fast and shallow. I have spent my life in that swamp, and I had never once heard it go fully silent. It is not a thing that happens. The basin does not hold its breath. It was holding its breath now. And then, out across the black, still water, something began to call. And it was not a sound I knew. It was low and wet, and it rose and fell in a way that almost had a shape to it, almost like words, almost like a voice trying to remember how a voice goes. And it came from out in the cypress, and it was answered, a moment later, from a different direction, by the same wrong call. So that for one cold moment I could not tell if there was one of them or two, or if the swamp itself was throwing the sound back. Roy had gone rigid in the bow. He reached back and gripped my wrist, hard, the same as he had at the bed that morning, and he put his mouth close to my ear and breathed, so low I felt it more than heard it. Do not answer it, do not shine that light. Whatever it sounds like next, you hold still, and you keep quiet, and you do not look for it. And I did not understand the whatever it sounds like next, not yet. I understood it a few minutes later, and I have never stopped understanding it since, because the wrong calling stopped. And the silence stretched out, heavy as the water. And then, out of the night, from the cypress maybe 40 yards off our bow, a young man's voice came across the water, clear and frightened and exhausted, and it called out, "Uncle Roy? Uncle Roy, is that you? Help me, I am over here, I am hurt, please." And it was Lonnie Naquin's voice. I had never heard the boy speak in life, but I felt Roy Naquin's whole body seize when it came across that water. And I knew, the way you know a thing in your spine before your mind agrees to it, that the swamp had put on a new skin, exactly as the old woman said it would, and that the thing out there in the night was wearing the voice of the boy it had taken, and using it to call his grieving uncle off the boat and into the black water. I have to tell you what it cost Roy Naquin not to answer that voice, because it is the bravest and most terrible thing I have ever watched a man do. And I watched it from 2 feet away in the lightless middle of that swamp. The voice called again. "Uncle Roy, I can see your boat. Why are you not coming? Please, it hurts. Come get me." And it was perfect. It was the boy, exactly, the catch of fear in it. The particular way he must have said Uncle Roy 10,000 times since he was small. And Roy Naquin, who had half raised that boy, who had been waiting 40 years for this thing to come back around his family, who wanted nothing in this world but to find Lonnie alive, sat in the bow of my boat in the night with his hands locked white around the gunwale, and tears running down into his white stubble, and his jaw clamped shut, and he did not answer, and he did not move, and he made a low sound in his chest like a man holding back the worst grief of his life with his bare hands, because he knew better than anyone alive, that the boy was already gone, and that the voice was the bait, and that to answer it, to reach toward it, to give it one sound to home in on, was to die. I have never respected a human being more than I respected Roy Naquin in that hour. The thing tried for a long time. The voice came again and again, from one direction and then another, circling us slow through the cypress, the way the silence had circled us. And each time it was a little different, a little more pleading, and then a little less like Lonnie, and a little more like something working a tool it did not fully understand, the words slurring at the edges into that wet wrong call underneath. Once, near the end, it tried a different voice. It called Roy by a name I did not know, an old name, in a voice older than Lonnie's, and Roy made a sound like he had been struck. And I understood later that it had reached back 40 years and found the voice of his brother, Lonnie's father, the one it had taken off a calm boat all those years ago, and was using that too. It had kept that voice for 40 years. I think about that more than almost anything. It had kept his brother's voice for 40 years, waiting for a night like this one to use it. We held still. We held still and silent through all of it, through hours of it, and at some point the voices stopped, and the wrong calling stopped. And slowly from the far edges inward, the ordinary voice of the swamp came back, a frog, then another, then the insects and the gators and the whole roaring chorus. And I have never been so glad to hear anything in my life, because it meant the thing had moved off, had given up on the 2 quiet fools in the boat for that night, and gone back to its bed before the light. We did not sleep. We sat in that boat with the spotlight ready and our backs to each other, watching the water in both directions until the gray came up in the east and gave us back the basin, and the moment there was light enough to run by, I started the motor and we ran for the landing, fast, too fast, banging off the chop, and neither of us looked back, and neither of us said one word the whole way in. We should have stayed off that water after that. I want that understood. By every measure of sense. The search for Lonnie Naquin should have become a recovery, run by a full team, in daylight, with the basin closed to everyone at night. And for 2 days, that is what it was. We ran the basin in numbers and in daylight, found nothing, no boy, no body, no further sign. And the official search wound down the way they do, and the talk turned to drowning, and currents, and the things the world can stand to believe. I let it. I did not tell the team about the claw marks 12 feet up the cypress, or the nutria laid out in their row, or the bed in the dead-end bayou, or the voice that had warned Lonnie Naquin across the black water in the night. I told them we had searched and found nothing, which was true, and was a fraction of the truth, and I have carried the rest of it alone, until now. But Roy Naquin would not let it go, and God help me, neither could I. On the third night, Roy came to my house after sundown. He had a plan, and it was a bad one, and I knew it was a bad one, and I went along with it anyway, because there was a piece of me that needed to know as badly as he did, and because I could not let an old man go back out onto that water alone. Roy believed, from the old stories, that the thing kept what it took in a place, for a while, before the end, and that the place would be near its bed, in the deep still heart of the basin where it laid up by day. He believed there was still a chance, a small and fading one, that some part of Lonnie was still out there in that place, and that we had one more night to find it before the thing finished whatever it did. And he believed, and this is the part that I let persuade me, that the thing hunted by night, away from its bed, and that the one time you might safely get close to where it kept its takings was in the gray hour before dawn, when it had come back in from its hunting and gone heavy and slow and sleeping in its bed. So a little after midnight, the two of us pushed off again into the basin, against every rule I had, with the plan to be deep in the heart of it, near that dead-end bayou where the bed was, in the gray hour before first light, and to look, fast and quiet, for the place where it kept what it took, and to be gone before the sun was full up. It was the worst decision of my life, and I made it with my eyes open, and the only thing I can say for myself is that I made it for an old man who had lost his whole family to that water and could not be talked out of going, and I would rather have died beside him than let him go alone. As it turned out, that very nearly was the choice. We ran without lights as much as we could, by the little moon in Roy's memory, deep into the basin, into the oldest part of it, where the cypress are giants, and the water lies black and still as oil and the canopy closes out the sky. We cut the motor a long way out from the dead-end bayou, and went the last stretch on the trolling motor, in silence, the smell of the bed reaching us across the water, growing stronger, that rank wet musk, and Roy guided us not into the bed bayou but into another one beside it, a narrow twisting slough that he believed led to the place we were looking for. And as the gray of first light began to seep down through the moss, we came around a last screen of cypress into a small hidden clearing in the deep heart of the swamp, and we found what it kept. I am going to tell you only the shape of it. Some of it belongs to the families, and some of it I cannot put into words that I could live with having said. There was a kind of platform or mound at the back of that clearing, built up out of the black water on a tangle of cypress knees and dragged deadfall and packed mud, a made thing, the work of years, and on it and around it the thing had kept its takings, the way Roy's old stories said, the way some part of me had refused to believe until I saw it. There were boats, old ones, swamped and rotted, and newer ones, and I saw, near the front, a small aluminum boat I recognized because I had seen its twin idling empty in a clearing 4 days before. And there were the takings themselves, what the swamp and the years and the thing had left of them, going back further than I let my eyes follow, and near the newest of them, I will tell you, because Roy made a sound when he saw it that I will hear until I die, was a young man, and there was enough left to know him, and it was Lonnie Naquin, and he had not been alive for some days, and he had been kept, and arranged, made part of that terrible made place, the same as all the rest. Roy Naquin went toward him. Of course he did. I should have stopped him, the way I have replayed stopping him 10,000 times since, but he came up out of the bow before I understood what he meant to do. Up onto the edge of that mound in the gray half-light, reaching for the boy, making a low broken sound, his whole 40 years of waiting and grief pouring out of him at once. And the mound moved, what I had taken in the gray gloom for one more tangle of deadfall and mud and shadow at the back of that platform rose up, and stood. And it was tall, far taller than a man, and broad and wrong, and the color of wet mud and gray hide, and it had been lying there in its bed the whole time, exactly where Roy's plan had counted on it being, sleeping heavy after its hunting, and Roy Nackwin had walked right up onto its bed and into reach of it, and now it was awake and it was rising, and the smell of it filled up the whole world. I did the only thing there was to do, and I did it without thinking, because there was no time to think. I had a flare gun in the boat, a signal gun, loaded, in the box by my seat, and my hand was on it before my mind had finished understanding what I was seeing. I fired it into the thing as it rose over Roy. The flare hit it square and burst, a roaring ball of red fire and smoke right against the bulk of it, and the thing came apart from its rising into a thrashing, scrambling recoil, a horrible fast fluid lunge backward off the mound and into the black water with a sound and a force that rocked my boat and threw a wave up over the gunwale. And in the red light of that burning flare, for 1 second, less than a second, I saw it whole, and I am not going to be able to give you that second because my mind has it walled off behind a door that I do not open. And the not opening of that door is the only reason I am able to sit here and tell you the rest of this at all. I will tell you only that it was not a gator, and not a bear, and not a man, and that all three of those guesses are closer to the truth than the truth was. It went into the water. The flare died hissing on the surface, and Roy Nackwin was down on the edge of the mound, where its rising had knocked him, and I drove my boat up against that terrible platform, and I grabbed him by the back of his shirt, and I hauled him, an old lean swamper but dead weight now, over the gunwale and into the bottom of the boat, and I got the motor started, and I have never in my life been so grateful for an engine catching first pull, and I threw the throttle down and ran us out of that clearing, out of that slough, into the wider water, running blind through the gray cypress maze with the wake throwing up behind us, and the thing came after us in the water. I could not see it. That was the worst part. I could only see its wake, a long, low surge in the black water off our flank, keeping pace, falling back, surging again, the way a thing pushes a wave ahead of itself when it swims just under the surface. Fast, far faster than a gator, matching my boat, hurting us, and twice it came in close enough that the swell of it lifted our hull, and Roy, conscious now and gripping the seat, screamed at me to mind the stumps, to not pile us up, because to pile up in that water with that thing in it was to die. I ran that basin in the gray dawn the way I have never run it before or since, by instinct and memory and terror, threading the cypress and the knees and the stumps at a speed that should have killed us a dozen times, and the wake stayed with us, off one flank and then the other, until we burst at last out of the deep heart of the swamp into a wider channel where the light was coming up full and clean, and somewhere in that channel, as the sun cleared the trees and lay down on the water, the wake fell away behind us, and was gone, and did not come back. I do not fully know why it broke off. I have thought about it for years. Maybe it would not follow into the full open light. Maybe the flare had hurt it, or frightened it. A thing that has been the only fear in its swamp for 1,000 years, suddenly burned by a red fire out of a boat. Maybe it simply decided two of us, awake and running and armed with fire, were more than it cared to take that morning, when it had its takings already and there would be other dawns and other careless men. I will never know. The not knowing is the thing I have learned to live alongside, like an old wound that aches before rain. We made the landing in full daylight, the two of us shaking and soaked and silent, and we tied up, and Roy Nackwin sat down on the boards of that landing and put his face in his hands, and the sounds he made then were not for me to hear. So I walked a little way off and let the old man grieve his whole family at once on the planks of a boat landing in the morning sun. We did not tell anyone the truth. What truth was there to tell that any sane person would hear? We reported that we had found Lonnie Nackwin deceased in a remote part of the basin, that the body was unrecoverable in the terrain and the water, which was true because nothing on this earth was going to make me take a recovery team into that clearing. The record says Lonnie Nackwin drowned crawfishing, body lost in the basin, the same as it says about his father 40 years before. The same as it says, I have since come to understand, about a long quiet line of basin men going back as far as the records go, every one of them a drowning, every one of them a boat found idling empty on calm water, every one of them a man who knew that swamp too well to drown in it. I have read back through the old reports since, on my own time, in the office at night, And once you know what you are looking at, the pattern is right there, hiding in plain sight under 60 years of the word drowning. And I am the first one, maybe, to read them all together and see the shape of the thing in them. And I have told no one, because there is nothing to be done, and telling would only cost me my badge and my good name and change nothing at all. The swamp keeps what it takes. The reports keep the rest. Roy Nakin passed away a little over a year later. Old age, his heart, the long grief, all of it. He went quiet, in his camp, on the water he had fished his whole life. And I was glad, in a way I cannot fully explain, that the swamp let him go on his own terms in the end, and did not take him the way it took the rest of his blood. I was with him near the end, and the last real thing he said to me, with that old clarity coming back into his eyes for a moment, was, "You keep off the heart of that basin at night, Émile. You hear me. It knows your boat now. It knows your boat." And then he was gone, and he took the last of the old knowing with him. And now there is only me. And now, I suppose, there is you. Here is the part I have never put in any report. The part that is the reason I am telling you all of this tonight. I still work the basin. I cannot leave it. It is the only thing I have ever been or ever wanted to be, and most of it, the daylight miles of it, the open water and the fish camps and the herons and the ordinary beautiful working swamp, is the great love of my life and always will be. But I do not go into the deep heart of it anymore, into the old giant cypress where the water lies still as oil, and I do not, under any circumstance, for any reason, put my boat on that water after the sun goes down. I run the edges in the day and I am off the water by dusk every day, and the younger officers think the old swamper has gotten timid in his age, and I let them think it. Because twice now, on still evenings, running the edge of the basin a little later than I should have, with the gray coming down, I have heard, far off across the black water from the deep heart of the swamp, the night birds and the frogs all hush at once in a spreading ring of silence. And in that silence, I have heard a voice come across the water, calling. Once it was Roy Naquin's voice, calling me by name, low and tired, telling me he was hurt, telling me to come on out and help him, from the deep heart of a swamp where Roy Naquin has been a year in his grave. I did not answer. I did not shine my light. I opened the throttle, and I ran for the landing in the last of the light, and I did not look back. So if you take one thing from a tired old swamper tonight, take this. If you are ever out on still black water, deep in some great wild swamp, far from the camps, and you notice that the whole roaring voice of the place has gone silent all at once, that the frogs and the birds and the gators have all hushed together, then you are not alone, and the thing that hushed them is putting on a skin to come close. And if, in that silence, a voice you love calls to you across the water, hurt and pleading, and asking you to come, you remember the rule that an old man and an old woman both spent their last good breath teaching me. Do not answer it. Do not go to it. Do not give it one sound to find you by. Run for the light, and get yourself to dry land, and do not ever go back out onto the heart of that water in the night, because the swamp keeps what it takes, and it is patient, and it has all the time in the world, and the only ones who ever come home are the ones who learn, while there is still light to learn it by, not to answer when the water calls them by name. I usually finish my shift after everyone else is already asleep. So walking my dog Wren under the dim suburban glow had become routine. That night, the street shone with leftovers from a recent rain, creating silvery puddles that splintered the yard lights into shards of glare. It was that familiar Texas suburb, family homes in neat rows, the sort of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. But the reflections bouncing off the wet pavement gave everything an odd haze. I kept squinting, trying to figure out if my eyes were just tired, or if the gleaming lights truly made it harder to see anything beyond their reach. The neighborhood was hushed. No other dog walkers were around. No cars rolling by. Just Wren and me. Wren was this sweet, laid-back companion, barely raising an eyebrow at squirrels, let alone strangers. Normally that was comforting. Tonight, though, his calm demeanor only emphasized how alone we were. The houses stood dark, their windows like empty eyes watching us pass. I noticed details I'd never paid attention to before. The way shadows pooled beneath parked cars, how the spaces between houses created tunnels of darkness that seemed to breathe with unseen movement. My footsteps echoed against the wet asphalt, each sound bouncing off garage doors and returning to me distorted. The air hung heavy with moisture and something else. That electric feeling before a storm, though the sky remained clear. I pulled my jacket tighter, not from cold but from an inexplicable need for protection. My mind started to drift into darker corners, wondering how safe we really were. We kept moving along that narrow road, with no sidewalks, hugging the edge whenever I heard the distant possibility of a car. Tonight, though, there was no hint of an engine. My thoughts wandered. I caught myself gazing up at the stars one moment, then scanning the dark lawns for any sign of life the next. That was when I spotted some shape, shadowy and distant, far up ahead. It could have been anything. The way the street lights played tricks with perspective made it impossible to judge distance or size at first. The figure seemed to materialize from the darkness itself, as if the shadows had suddenly decided to take human form. Maybe a trick of the light. But I knew I wasn't imagining it when it seemed to inch closer. The movement was wrong somehow, too smooth, too deliberate. Most people walking at night have a purpose: heading home, walking a pet, getting exercise. This figure moved with the patience of someone who had nowhere to be, nothing but time. Despite my pulse kicking up, I told myself it was probably just a neighbor. No big deal, right? I couldn't turn around anyway, or I'd risk having this person behind me for the rest of my walk. The thought of being followed sent ice through my veins. Better to face whatever this was head on. So onward I went, staying near the curb with Ren snuffling at every mailbox post. The figure looked tall, and as we got nearer, I noticed they wore glasses. The glow of the yard lights reflected off the lenses, revealing the slightest flicker each time they shifted. That reflection was weirdly hypnotic, like two little mirrors aimed my way. I tried not to stare, but something about those glasses drew my attention. They seemed oversized, almost theatrical, catching and throwing back every available photon of light. The face behind them remained obscured, features lost in shadow despite the ambient glow. Only those twin reflections existed, floating in the darkness like disembodied eyes. The next overhead street lamp was a good stretch down the road, leaving a big patch of gloom between us. In those few seconds of partial darkness, I realized how quiet the figure was. No phone in hand, no shuffle of feet on gravel, nothing. Most people make noise when they walk. Keys jingling, clothes rustling, breath visible in the humid night air. This person moved in complete silence, as if they'd practiced the art of being unnoticed. I could hear my own breathing now, quick and shallow. Ren's collar tags clinked softly with each step. But from the approaching figure, nothing. Not even the scrape of shoes on pavement. I braced myself, half expecting a greeting or nod. That moment never arrived. Ren perked up. This was unusual. He barely reacted to strangers. His body went rigid beneath my hand, muscles bunching under his fur. A low growl started deep in his chest, something I'd never heard from him before. The leash went taut in my grip. We were nearly side by side when the figure stopped. My breath caught in my throat. The person stood perhaps 6 feet away, close enough that I should have been able to make out features, clothing details, something. But all I could focus on were those glasses, now perfectly still, aimed directly at me. Without a word, this person started to move in reverse, every step aligning with mine as if we were dancing to some silent beat. The movement was impossibly smooth, heel to toe in perfect reverse, maintaining that exact distance between us. No stumbling, no glancing back to check footing. Just that steady, unnatural backward glide. Ren, normally my gentle buddy, erupted in barks, straining so hard that I nearly lost my balance. The sound shattered the suburban quiet, echoing off houses and setting off a distant dog somewhere blocks away. But the figure never flinched, never acknowledged the noise. just kept that backward pace, those reflective lenses never wavering from my face. My thoughts careened from embarrassment over my suddenly feral-sounding dog to a sharper dread pulsing at the edges of my mind. The stranger had no dog, no friendly wave, just a silent backward pace, keeping that reflective stare locked on me. I couldn't pin down what felt more unsettling, Ren's fierce reaction, or the steady way the stranger retreated, never breaking eye contact from behind those lenses. In that instant, the streetlights seemed dimmer, the houses too still. Every window appeared dark, every porch light suddenly inadequate. The familiar neighborhood transformed into something alien, a stage set for nightmares. I gripped Ren's leash with trembling hands, not sure whether to shout or just keep moving. The only thing I knew for certain was that every inch of me wanted to get out of there, fast. My legs felt heavy, like moving through water. The figure continued its backward progression, matching my speed exactly. When I slowed, it slowed. When I quickened my pace, it did the same. We were locked in this grotesque dance, and I had no idea how to break free. I wasn't about to wait there, locked in that disturbing standoff with a stranger who glided backward like some silent puppet. My eyes landed on a brighter intersection a short distance away, lit by scattered porch bulbs and the faint glow of passing headlights. Without a second thought, I tugged on Ren's leash and practically lunged in that direction. He resisted at first, barking, as though unwilling to let this bizarre threat out of his sight. It took a few harsh pulls before he followed, both of us stumbling onto the better-lit side road. The sudden shift from dark to light made my eyes ache. I looked back, searching for any glimpse of the stranger. But the gloomy stretch of houses seemed deserted. Either he'd melted into the shadows, or my nerves were wound so tight that I just couldn't see clearly. The spot where we'd had our encounter looked ordinary now, just another patch of suburban street. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt. The wrongness of it clung to me like cobwebs. Ren whined, ears pinned forward, still keyed up like something wasn't right. His hackles remained raised, and he kept looking back the way we'd come. Animals know things we don't, sense dangers our civilized minds dismiss. If Ren was still afraid, I had every reason to be terrified. My grip on his leash was damp with sweat, and I kept expecting to spot a silhouette lurking behind a mailbox or creeping around the corner. Every shadow seemed to move. Every dark space between houses held potential threat. The normal sounds of night, crickets, distant traffic, the hum of air conditioners, all seemed muffled, as if the world held its breath. All I wanted at that point was the safe familiarity of home. Every time a branch rustled or a night bird called, I nearly jumped. A cat darted across the street ahead, and I bit back a scream. My rational mind tried to assert control, reminding me that I was in my own neighborhood, surrounded by sleeping families in their beds. But terror has its own logic, and mine insisted that danger still lurked nearby. There was no one to call out to, no friendly face peeking through a window. The houses might as well have been empty shells, facades with nothing behind them. Just a few blocks more, I thought. A few more blocks, and I could slam my door shut against whatever madness I'd just witnessed. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to catch a flicker of those reflective glasses in the distance. Instead, all I saw were wet driveways and dim silhouettes of parked cars. But the feeling persisted, that crawling certainty of being watched, evaluated, measured for some purpose I couldn't fathom. My house felt impossibly far away, but after what seemed like forever, I spotted my porch light. The familiar sight should have brought relief, but instead, it highlighted how exposed I was in that final stretch. The last 100 yards to safety felt like miles. Normally that soft glow was comforting in an everyday sort of way, but tonight it felt like a beacon. Ren pulled ahead, eager to get inside as well. He wasn't calm yet, and honestly, neither was I. By the time I reached the front door, my hands were shaking so badly that I had to fumble with my keys a few times before I managed to fit one into the lock. When the door clicked open, I nearly burst through, dragging Ren in behind me. I flicked on every lamp I could reach, then flipped them off again when I realized how exposed the bright windows might make me. Then I reversed my choice. Darkness felt even more vulnerable. I settled for a single table lamp in the living room, just enough to see what I was doing. I spent the next hour perched on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, debating whether to call someone, anyone, and explain. But what would I say? That a strange man freaked me out by walking in reverse? It sounded ridiculous, yet the dread felt so real. The physical symptoms, racing heart, sweaty palms, that hollow feeling in my stomach, all testified to genuine terror. Sleep was out of the question. Even after I finally managed to shut off the lights and make my way to bed, I kept imagining footsteps crunching on gravel outside my window. Each settling of the house, every creak and groan of wood adjusting to temperature changes, sent fresh waves of panic through me. By morning, the sun spilled in through the blinds, painting everything in warm, normal hues. The terror felt distant, almost unreal, as though my mind had conjured it in the darkness. I made coffee with unsteady hands, trying to rationalize what had happened. But rationalization crumbled when I looked at Ren, saw the way he still watched the windows with unusual alertness. I never did see the figure again. Still, each evening afterward, whenever I took Ren out, I caught myself scanning the end of every street, looking for a tall silhouette, maybe a glint of glasses. The familiar route became a gauntlet of anxiety. I started varying my schedule, taking different streets, anything to avoid that particular stretch of road. And if I so much as glimpsed any shape in the distance, my chest tightened in an instant. Other dog walkers became sources of suspicion until they passed with normal greetings. Joggers approaching from behind made me grip Ren's leash tighter. The neighborhood I'd called home for years had transformed into a landscape of potential threats. That's the thing about terror. It clings to you, even long after your doorstep is locked up tight, like it's prowling just behind the places where the light stops. It changes you, makes you see danger in the ordinary, makes you question whether the safety you once took for granted ever really existed at all. And on quiet nights, when the streetlights cast their familiar glow on wet pavement, I remember those reflecting glasses and wonder if somewhere out there, that figure still walks backward through the darkness, waiting for another late-night encounter. When I think back to that summer of 2018, I can still feel the weight of the forest pressing down on me. The thick, humid air carrying a silence that didn't feel right. My uncle's cabin sat miles away from anything resembling civilization, tucked deep into the woods where the trees grew too close together, and the dirt road in was more crater than path. It wasn't the kind of place you found yourself accidentally. You had to want to be there, or in my case, have no choice. I was 15 then, old enough to understand that this wasn't a vacation but more of a punishment. My parents had shipped me off to spend 3 weeks with my uncle after what they called the incident at school. My younger siblings, Grace and Sam, had been dragged along, probably to keep me from feeling completely isolated. Grace was 13, all sharp elbows and sharper tongue, while Sam, barely 11, still believed in monsters under the bed. How ironic that would prove to be. The cabin itself was a relic from another era, built sometime in the 1960s when people still thought isolation was romantic rather than terrifying. The wooden walls were thick with decades of varnish, dark and heavy, and the windows were small, letting in just enough light to remind you that the outside world existed. Inside, everything smelled of pine and something else, something musty and old that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. My cousin Vincent had arrived the day before us. He was 17, confident in that way that only comes from never having your world truly shaken. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy smile that made adults trust him immediately. Vincent had always been the golden child of the family. Where I was awkward and prone to trouble, he was smooth and reliable. The kind of person who could talk his way out of anything, or so we thought. That first evening, as we unpacked our bags in the stifling heat, Vincent laid down the rules for our stay. The forest was ours to explore, he said, but there were boundaries. The creek to the east was safe for swimming, though the current could be tricky. The old logging trail to the north led to a clearing where we could play games. But the area past the hollow tree was off limits, absolutely forbidden. The hollow tree stood like a monument at the edge of a small clearing, its trunk wide enough for all four of us to hide behind at once. Its bark was scarred with deep grooves that looked too deliberate to be natural, like someone or something had clawed at it over the years. The inside of the tree was hollowed out, creating a dark cave that seemed to swallow light. Vincent told us it marked the property line, and we weren't supposed to go beyond it because of the steep ravine on the other side. But even then, watching the way his eyes avoided the tree when he spoke, I could tell there was something he wasn't saying. The way his voice dropped when he mentioned it, the quick glance he shot toward the tree line, the slight tremor in his hands, all of it suggested that the ravine wasn't the real reason we needed to stay away. Our days fell into a routine quickly. Mornings were spent helping with chores around the cabin. Afternoons were ours to explore, and evenings we'd sit on the porch, listening to Vincent tell stories about the woods. He had an endless supply of them, tales of old logging camps and forgotten settlements, of hunters who'd gotten lost and emerged weeks later with no memory of where they'd been. But it was the games that really drew us together. Vincent had a talent for making everything feel like an adventure, even something as simple as hide and seek. He'd set elaborate rules, create complex scenarios, turn our play into epic quests that could last for hours. Grace and Sam adored him, hanging on his every word, and I found myself drawn in despite my usual teenage cynicism. Hide and seek was our favorite game, partly because the forest provided such perfect hiding spots. Fallen logs created natural shelters. Thick undergrowth could conceal a person completely, and the varying elevations meant you could disappear into a depression in the ground and become invisible. Vincent was always the hardest to find, seeming to vanish into the forest itself, while Sam was hopeless at staying quiet, always giving himself away with giggles or the rustling of leaves. But there was an unspoken understanding about the boundaries. We might venture farther from the cabin during the day, but we always stayed well away from the hollow tree. It stood there at the edge of our playground, a constant reminder that our freedom had limits. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at it, wondering what lay beyond. But Vincent's warnings echoed in my head, and I never quite worked up the courage to investigate. The forest around the cabin was alive during the day, filled with the sounds of birds and insects, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Squirrels chattered in the trees, woodpeckers drummed against dead bark, and somewhere in the distance, you could always hear the gentle murmur of the creek. It felt safe, normal, the kind of place where children could play without worry. But as the sun began to set each day, something changed. The sounds would fade, one by one, until an unnatural quiet settled over everything. The birds would stop singing, the insects would fall silent, and even the ever-present buzz of mosquitoes would disappear. It was during these evening hours that the forest felt different, heavier, as though it was holding its breath. The evening that changed everything started like all the others. The sun was sinking low, turning the sky a dusky orange, and the woods were beginning their nightly transformation from welcoming playground to something more ominous. Vincent suggested we play one last game of hide and seek before heading inside, and as usual, I volunteered to be the seeker. I didn't mind the role. There was something satisfying about the hunt, the methodical process of searching every potential hiding spot. I positioned myself against the old oak tree near the cabin, squeezing my eyes shut and beginning the familiar countdown. 1, 2, 3. My voice echoed slightly in the clearing, and I could hear the others scattering, their footsteps growing fainter as they sought their hiding places. The forest seemed to lean in around me as I counted, the shadows growing longer and deeper with each passing second. 18, 19, 20. Ready or not, here I come. I opened my eyes and immediately felt that first prickle of unease. The forest had gone quiet. Too quiet. The usual evening sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a night bird, the gentle creaking of branches, all of it had vanished. It was just me and the sound of my own breathing, sharp and loud in the unnatural silence. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to the natural nervousness that always came with being alone as darkness approached. The game had to go on, and I had a reputation to maintain as the family's most persistent seeker. I started with the obvious spots first: the fallen log where Sam liked to hide, the cluster of thick bushes where Grace often crouched, but both spots were empty, not even a sign that someone had been there recently. Moving deeper into the forest, I called out their names, my voice seeming to fall flat against the trees. Grace, Sam, Vincent. The silence that followed was absolute, as though the forest had absorbed my words completely. I found Sam first, his bright red sneakers giving him away from behind a boulder. He emerged with his usual grin, but I noticed his eyes darting nervously toward the darkening trees. Grace was trickier, tucked into the hollow of an old tree root. But a flash of her yellow t-shirt caught my eye. She crawled out, brushing dirt from her clothes. But like Sam, she seemed on edge, constantly looking over her shoulder. "Where's Vincent?" she whispered, and I realized that in all my searching, I hadn't found a single trace of our cousin. "Vincent!" I called, louder this time, my voice carrying further into the darkening woods. No response. The three of us stood there in the growing gloom, the familiar forest suddenly feeling vast and threatening around us. We searched for Vincent for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. The sun had almost disappeared, leaving us with just the pale light filtering through the canopy. Sam was getting scared, staying close to my side and jumping at every small sound. Grace was trying to maintain her usual tough facade, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Vincent!" we called in unison, our voices creating an eerie chorus that seemed to bounce back from the trees wrong, distorted somehow. The hollow tree loomed ahead of us, its dark opening like a mouth in the twilight. We'd avoided it all week, but now it seemed like the only place left to search. "Maybe he's hiding behind it," Grace suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. We approached slowly, our feet crackling on the dried leaves and fallen branches. The temperature seemed to drop with each step, and the shadows around the tree were deeper, more absolute than they should have been. As we drew closer, I caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye. There, standing just beyond the hollow tree, was a figure. My heart leaped with relief. "Vincent!" I called out, starting to run toward him. But something made me stop. Some instinct that screamed danger. The figure was the right height, the right build, but something was wrong with the way it stood. Too rigid, too still, like a mannequin posed by an amateur. Its head was tilted at an odd angle, as though it were listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. And when it turned toward us, my stomach dropped. It was Vincent's face, but wrong. The features were all there but arranged slightly off, like a photograph that had been cut up and reassembled by someone who'd never seen the original. The smile was too wide, stretching across the face in a way that made my skin crawl. And the eyes, God, the eyes were the worst part. They were Vincent's eyes, but they held something else, something hungry and alien that made every instinct in my body scream to run. "Vincent?" Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. The thing wearing Vincent's face took a step toward us, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being controlled by someone who'd never learned how to make it walk properly. Its arms swung stiffly at its sides, and its head stayed tilted at that unnatural angle. I grabbed both Grace and Sam, pulling them backward. "Run," I whispered. "Run now." We turned and bolted back toward the cabin, branches whipping at our faces, the ground seeming to shift and roll beneath our feet. Behind us, I could hear something following, footsteps that were too heavy, too irregular to be human. We burst through the cabin door like we were being chased by demons, which maybe we were. The familiar space of the living room felt like a sanctuary, but even as we slammed the door and threw the bolt, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Whatever was out there, it wasn't bound by normal rules. "What was that?" Sam gasped, his face pale and streaked with tears. Before I could answer, we heard Vincent's voice from the kitchen. "What's all the commotion about?" He emerged from the doorway, rubbing his eyes as though he'd just woken up, looking perfectly normal, perfectly human. We stared at him in shock, speechless. He was Vincent, the real Vincent, not the twisted version we'd seen in the woods. His eyes held their usual warmth. His smile was natural and concerned, not the horrible rictus we'd witnessed by the tree. But if he was here, then what had we seen out there? "We saw you," I managed to choke out. "In the woods, by the hollow tree." Vincent's expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face and his eyes darted to the windows. For a moment, he looked like he might deny it, make up some rational explanation. But then his shoulders sagged, and I saw real fear in his eyes. "Lock everything," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Every door, every window. Don't make a sound." The transformation in him was complete. Gone was the confident teenager who'd been leading our adventures all week. In his place was someone who understood exactly what kind of danger we were in. We scrambled to follow his instructions, racing from room to room, checking every possible entry point. The cabin had never felt so fragile, so exposed. The walls were just wood and glass, nothing that could really keep out something determined to get in. Vincent grabbed the old hunting rifle from behind the door, his hands shaking as he checked to make sure it was loaded. "What is it?" Grace whispered, her earlier bravado completely gone. "What's out there?" Vincent looked at her, then at Sam and me, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. Finally, he shook his head. "I don't know," he admitted. But it's not the first time. The admission hung in the air like a physical weight. Not the first time. That meant this had happened before. That whatever was out there had been waiting, watching, perhaps for weeks or months or longer. The thought made my skin crawl. The idea that we'd been playing and laughing and exploring while something monstrous lurked just beyond our sight. Outside, the forest had fallen into complete silence. No wind, no insects, no night sounds of any kind. It was as though everything natural had fled, leaving only us and whatever was stalking us in the darkness. Night fell completely, and with it came the voices. They started soft, almost like whispers carried on a wind that didn't exist. At first I thought I was imagining them, but the way Grace's head snapped up and Sam pressed closer to my side told me they were real. "Grace?" came a voice from outside, sweet and familiar. It was our mother's voice, calling like she did when it was time for dinner. "Come outside, sweetheart. It's time to come home." Grace's face went white, and she shook her head violently. "That's not her," she whispered. "Mom's 300 miles away." But the voice was perfect, exactly right down to the slight rasp Mom got when she was tired. It called again, more insistent this time. "Grace, honey, what are you doing in there? Come out right now." The tone was shifting, taking on the edge Mom got when she was getting angry, when punishment was coming if we didn't obey immediately. Then Sam's name joined the chorus, called in Dad's voice. "Samuel, you get out here this instant. You know better than to hide from me." Sam was shaking now, tears streaming down his face. The voice was perfect, capturing Dad's disappointed tone exactly, the one that meant we were in real trouble. Vincent appeared at my shoulder, the rifle clutched in his white-knuckled grip. "Don't listen," he hissed. "Whatever it is, it's trying to get us to open the door. It's learning from us, copying the voices it thinks will work." But even as he spoke, I heard my own name being called in Vincent's voice, though Vincent was standing right next to me. The voices multiplied, overlapping and contradicting each other. Sometimes it was Mom calling for Grace, Sometimes it was Dad demanding Sam come outside. Sometimes it was Vincent calling my name with increasing desperation. But then other voices joined in. Voices of teachers, friends, relatives. All of them begging and demanding and threatening. All of them trying to convince us to step outside. The worst part was how real they sounded. Not just the voices themselves, but the emotions behind them. I could hear genuine concern in Mom's voice, real anger in Dad's, authentic fear in the version of Vincent that was calling to me. Whatever was out there had studied us, learned not just how our family sounded, but how we related to each other. As the hours dragged on, the voices grew more sophisticated, more personal. They began referencing specific memories, inside jokes, private conversations. Mom's voice told Grace about the time she'd broken the lamp and never confessed. Dad's voice reminded Sam about the promise he'd made about cleaning his room. It was as though our own memories were being turned against us. "How does it know these things?" Grace whispered, covering her ears with her hands. Vincent looked grim, his eyes never leaving the windows. "I don't know," he said, "but it's been watching us, learning." The thought that we'd been observed, studied, cataloged like specimens made my stomach turn. The voices continued for hours, rising and falling like a twisted symphony. Sometimes they would stop completely, leaving us in that suffocating silence, and we'd begin to hope it was over. But then they would start again, more insistent than before, more desperate. Around what I guessed was midnight, they changed tactics. Instead of calling from outside, the voices seemed to come from inside the cabin itself. We'd hear Mom's voice from the kitchen, or Dad's from the bedroom, always just around the corner, always just out of sight. Vincent had us stay together in the living room, but the voices followed us even there. "I'm right here," Vincent's voice said from the corner of the room, though Vincent was sitting next to me. "Why won't you come to me?" The voice was hurt, confused, with just the right note of betrayal. If I hadn't been looking directly at the real Vincent, I might have believed it. Sam was the worst affected. At 11, he didn't have the same ability to rationalize what was happening. The voices of our parents calling to him were torture, and several times he tried to go to the door before we could stop him. "They need me," he sobbed. "They're scared. I have to help them." "It's not them," I kept telling him, holding him close. "Mom and Dad are safe at home. This is something else. Something that wants to hurt us." But even as I said it, I wondered how long any of us could hold out against this psychological assault. Vincent told us what he could during the brief quiet periods. His family had been coming to this cabin for generations, and there had always been stories. Hunters who disappeared near the hollow tree. Hikers found days later with no memory of where they'd been. Children who wandered too far into the woods and came back. Different. "My grandfather used to say something lived in these woods," Vincent whispered, his voice barely audible. "Something old and hungry. He said it could wear faces like clothes, become whatever it needed to be to get close to people." The idea was terrifying, but it explained what we'd seen, what we were hearing. As dawn approached, the voices gradually faded. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on us all night began to lift, and for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe properly. Vincent lowered the rifle, his arms shaking from holding it ready all night. "It's over," he said, but his voice held no relief, only exhaustion and dread. For now. Through the windows, pale morning light was beginning to filter through the trees, and the forest looked normal again, peaceful even. But I knew I'd never see it the same way. We didn't discuss what had happened. What was there to say? That something inhuman had spent the night trying to lure us to our deaths using the voices of our loved ones? That we'd seen Vincent's face on something that definitely wasn't Vincent? That we were trapped in a nightmare that felt all too real? Instead, we focused on getting out. Vincent went to get the car keys from his room, but returned empty-handed, his face pale. "They're gone," he said simply. We searched the entire cabin, but the keys were nowhere to be found. Vincent was certain he'd left them on his dresser, but now they were simply gone. "It took them," Grace said, and none of us argued. The thing in the woods didn't want us to leave. It wanted us to stay, to play its games, to eventually make the mistake that would let it get close enough to... what? We didn't want to find out. We spent the morning fortifying the cabin as best we could, moving furniture against the doors, checking and rechecking the windows. Vincent tried the old radio, hoping to call for help, but it produced nothing but static. We were truly alone. It was Sam who spotted them first. "Look," he said, pointing out the window toward the tree line. There, standing just visible among the trees, were figures. From a distance, they looked like people, but there was something wrong with the way they moved, the way they stood. Too stiff, too unnatural. As we watched, more appeared. Dozens of them, all standing perfectly still, all facing the cabin. Some looked like Vincent, some like us, some like people I didn't recognize but who felt familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching us with those wrong eyes. "How long have they been there?" Grace whispered, but none of us had an answer. They could have been there all morning, or all week, or longer. They could have been watching us every day we'd been playing in the woods, learning from us, copying us, waiting for their moment. Vincent made the decision for all of us. "We're leaving," he said. "On foot, through the woods, back to the main road. It's 15 miles, but we can make it if we stay together." The alternative was staying in the cabin and hoping someone would eventually come looking for us, but after last night, that seemed like a death sentence. We gathered what supplies we could carry, filled our water bottles, and prepared to make our run. Vincent took the lead with the rifle. I took the rear to watch for followers, and Grace and Sam stayed between us. As we opened the door, the figures in the tree line didn't move, but I could feel their attention like a physical weight. We made it to the main road as the sun was setting, exhausted and dehydrated but alive. A passing truck picked us up, and the driver didn't ask many questions about why 4 kids were hiking alone in the middle of nowhere. We told our families we'd decided to cut the trip short, that Vincent had gotten homesick. But I still dream about those woods sometimes. I dream about the hollow tree and the thing that wore Vincent's face. I dream about the voices calling to me in the dark, promising everything would be okay if I just opened the door. And sometimes, when I'm walking alone at night, I think I hear familiar voices calling my name from the shadows. I know it's just my imagination, just the lingering trauma of those few terrible days. But I never answer, and I never look back. Because somewhere deep in those dark woods, past the hollow tree, something is still waiting, still watching, still learning how to be human. And maybe, just maybe, it's gotten better at it. The first thing you should know about me is that I never planned to become an adventurer. My name is Émile Chen, and until a month ago, I was living a perfectly ordinary life as a software engineer in San Francisco. I had a small but comfortable apartment, a steady job at a tech startup, and a rescue cat named Pixel. My idea of excitement was trying a new coffee shop or attending a local tech meetup. Adventure, as far as I was concerned, was best experienced through the pages of a book or the screen of my laptop. But life has a funny way of upending our carefully laid plans. It all started with a phone call from my estranged uncle, Robert Chen. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since he'd had a falling out with my parents and disappeared into the wilderness of Alaska. The last I'd heard, he was living off the grid in a cabin somewhere near Denali National Park. "Emily," his voice crackled over the line, sounding distant and urgent. "I need your help. It's about your grandfather's legacy." I frowned, confused. My grandfather had passed away when I was just a child, and as far as I knew, he hadn't left much of a legacy beyond some old photos and a collection of vintage watches. "What are you talking about, Uncle Robert?" I asked, my fingers absently stroking Pixel's fur as she lounged on my lap. "There's no time to explain everything over the phone," he replied. his voice lowering to a near whisper. You need to come to Alaska. As soon as possible. I'll explain everything when you get here. I wanted to argue, to tell him that I couldn't just drop everything and fly to Alaska on a moment's notice. But something in his voice stopped me. It was a mix of urgency and fear. That wasn't like the Uncle Robert I remembered. All right, I found myself saying, much to my own surprise. I'll see what I can do. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. Pixel meowed softly, sensing my unease. What have I gotten myself into, Pix? I murmured, scratching her behind the ears. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I requested an emergency leave of absence from work, citing a family crisis. My boss, understanding but clearly annoyed, granted me 2 weeks. I arranged for my neighbor to look after Pixel, packed a bag with warm clothes, I'd heard Alaska could be brutally cold, even in the summer, and booked a flight to Fairbanks. As the plane took off from San Francisco International Airport, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a huge mistake. What did I know about surviving in the Alaskan wilderness? I was a city girl through and through, more comfortable navigating lines of code than hiking trails. And yet, here I was, flying into the unknown, all because of a cryptic phone call from an uncle I barely knew. The flight to Fairbanks was long and uneventful. I tried to distract myself by reading a book on my Kindle, but my mind kept wandering back to Uncle Robert's words. What did he mean by my grandfather's legacy? And why did he sound so scared? Fairbanks greeted me with a crisp, cool breeze that made me glad I'd packed my warmest jacket. As I collected my luggage, I scanned the crowd for Uncle Robert, but he was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I spotted a grizzled old man holding a sign with my name on it. You Emily Chen? He asked as I approached, his voice gruff but not unkind. I nodded, suddenly feeling very small and out of place. Name's Jim. Your uncle sent me to pick you up, he said, grabbing my suitcase before I could protest. It's a long drive to where we're headed. Hope you're ready for an adventure, city girl. As we walked to his battered pickup truck, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd gotten myself into. This was so far out of my comfort zone that I might as well have been on another planet. But there was no turning back now. The drive out of Fairbanks was beautiful in a way I'd never experienced before. The landscape was vast and wild, with dense forests giving way to sweeping tundra. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks shrouded in mist. It was awe-inspiring and more than a little intimidating. Jim wasn't much for conversation, which suited me fine. I was too busy trying to take in the scenery and calm my growing nerves. After what felt like hours, we turned off the main road onto a bumpy dirt track that wound its way deeper into the wilderness. Your uncle's place is just up ahead, Jim said, breaking the silence. Strange man, your uncle. Been living out here for years, barely comes into town. Whatever he's got you mixed up in, be careful. Before I could ask what he meant by that, we rounded a bend and I saw it. Uncle Robert's cabin. It was larger than I'd expected, a 2-story log structure nestled against a backdrop of towering pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, and I could see a figure moving behind one of the windows. As Jim pulled up in front of the cabin, the front door swung open, and Uncle Robert stepped out onto the porch. He looked older than I remembered, his hair now more gray than black, his face lined and weathered. But his eyes were the same, dark and intense, filled with a mixture of relief and worry. Emily, he called out as I climbed out of the truck. Thank God you're here. We don't have much time. I thanked Jim, who gave me one last concerned look before driving off, leaving me alone with my uncle and a growing sense of unease. Uncle Robert, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What's going on? Why did you call me here? He glanced around nervously, as if expecting to see someone watching us from the trees. Not out here, he said, ushering me inside. It's not safe. I'll explain everything, I promise. But first, we need to get you settled in. As I followed him into the cabin, lugging my suitcase behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into something much bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. My ordinary life in San Francisco seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by the looming mystery of my grandfather's legacy and the palpable fear in my uncle's eyes. The inside of Uncle Robert's cabin was a curious blend of rustic charm and high-tech equipment. The walls were lined with bookshelves crammed with volumes on a wide range of subjects, from Alaskan wildlife to advanced physics. A large fireplace dominated one wall of the living room, casting a warm glow over the space. But what caught my eye was the array of computers and scientific instruments that occupied a large desk in the corner. "Make yourself comfortable," Uncle Robert said, gesturing to a worn but cozy-looking armchair. "I'll make us some tea." As he busied himself in the small kitchen area, I took the opportunity to look around. My gaze was drawn to a series of maps pinned to one wall, covered in cryptic symbols and notations. Next to them hung a faded photograph of a man I recognized as my grandfather, standing in front of what looked like an ancient stone structure. Uncle Robert returned with 2 steaming mugs of tea. He handed one to me before settling into the chair opposite mine, his face grave. "Emily," he began, his voice low and intense. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound incredible. Impossible, even. But I need you to listen with an open mind. Your grandfather, our family, we're part of something much bigger than you can imagine." I sipped my tea, trying to calm my nerves. "What do you mean, Uncle Robert? What does this have to do with Grandpa's legacy?" He took a deep breath. "Your grandfather wasn't just an archaeologist, he was part of a secret society, one that's existed for centuries. They call themselves the Custodians of the Veil." I couldn't help but laugh nervously. "The Custodians of the Veil? Uncle Robert, this sounds like something out of a fantasy novel." His expression remained deadly serious. "I know how it sounds, Emily, but it's real. The veil they speak of isn't a physical thing. It's the barrier between our world and something else. Something ancient and powerful." I set my mug down, my head spinning. "I don't understand. Are you saying Grandpa was involved in some kind of cult?" Uncle Robert shook his head vehemently. "Not a cult. A group dedicated to protecting humanity from forces beyond our understanding. Your grandfather was a guardian, tasked with safeguarding one of the nexus points, places where the veil is thin, where things can slip through." I stood up, pacing the room. This was too much. "Uncle Robert, I'm a software engineer. I deal in logic, in code. What you're saying, it doesn't make any sense. I know, Emily. I didn't believe it at first either. But I've seen things. Things that defy explanation." He reached for a leather-bound journal on the coffee table and handed it to me. "This was your grandfather's. Read it. It will help you understand." With shaking hands, I opened the journal. The pages were filled with my grandfather's neat handwriting, interspersed with diagrams and sketches. As I skimmed through it, I saw references to ancient artifacts, ley lines, and entities with unpronounceable names. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, looking up from the journal. Uncle Robert's face darkened. "Because the veil is weakening. The nexus point your grandfather guarded. It's becoming unstable. And there are those who would exploit this, who would tear down the veil entirely, not understanding the catastrophe it would unleash." I sank back into my chair, my mind reeling. "And you think I can help?" "Uncle Robert, I'm not equipped for this kind of thing." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You are, Emily. More than you know. The ability to sense the veil, to interact with it. It runs in our family. Your grandfather had it. I have it. And I believe you do too." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "This is insane. You're talking about magic, about monsters. These things don't exist. Don't they?" Uncle Robert stood and walked to his desk. He returned with a small, intricately carved stone box. Open it, he said, placing it in my hands. Hesitantly, I lifted the lid. Inside was what looked like a simple compass, but instead of cardinal directions, its face was marked with symbols I didn't recognize. As I touched it, the needle began to spin wildly. That's a veil dial, Uncle Robert explained. It reacts to the presence of veil energy, and right now it's going crazy because of you. I stared at the spinning needle, a chill running down my spine. Part of me wanted to throw the veil dial across the room, to run out of the cabin and never look back. But another part, a part I barely recognized, was fascinated. What do you need me to do? I heard myself asking. Uncle Robert's shoulders sagged with relief. We need to stabilize the nexus point. Your grandfather left clues, a series of riddles that lead to the artifacts we need. But time is running out. The ones who want to tear down the veil, they're closing in. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. Okay, I said finally. Where do we start? Uncle Robert smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. With this, he said, pulling out an old yellowed piece of paper. On it was written a cryptic verse. Where earth meets sky in eternal dance, seek the stone that gleams like frozen fire. In the shadow of the sleeping giant, the first key awaits the worthy aspirant. This is the first clue, Uncle Robert explained. We need to decipher it and find the artifact it points to. Are you ready for this, Emily? I looked down at the veil dial in my hand, its needle still spinning frantically. Then I thought of my quiet life in San Francisco, of lines of code and predictable routines. Something had called me here, something I didn't understand but couldn't ignore. I'm ready, I said, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. As night fell over the Alaskan wilderness, Uncle Robert and I bent over maps and ancient texts, trying to unravel the mystery my grandfather had left behind. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of adventure and danger. Little did I know, our quest was about to take us deep into the heart of Alaska's wildest regions, where the line between myth and reality blurred, and where I would discover strengths I never knew I possessed. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the Alaskan sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I awoke feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. We had spent most of the night poring over maps and my grandfather's journals, trying to decipher the first clue. As I made my way downstairs, the smell of coffee and bacon greeted me. Uncle Robert was in the kitchen, looking as if he hadn't slept at all. Good morning, he said, sliding a plate of breakfast towards me. Eat up. We've got a long day ahead of us. I sat down at the small kitchen table, my mind still whirling with everything I'd learned. Did you figure out the riddle? I asked between bites of scrambled eggs. Uncle Robert nodded, spreading out a topographical map on the table. I think so. Where earth meets sky in eternal dance. That's got to be referring to the mountains. And the sleeping giant? That's what the local Athabascan people call Denali. I leaned in, studying the map. Denali, formerly known as Mount McKinley, was the highest peak in North America. Its massive form dominated the landscape of central Alaska. So we're heading to Denali? I asked, a mixture of excitement and apprehension coursing through me. Not quite to the mountain itself, Uncle Robert replied. The clue mentions the shadow of the sleeping giant. I think we're looking for a specific spot in Denali's shadow. There's an area here, he pointed to a spot on the map, where an unusual geological formation has been reported. Locals call it the frozen flame, because of the way the rocks catch the light. I nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. The stone that gleams like frozen fire, that has to be it. Exactly, Uncle Robert said, a hint of pride in his voice. We'll drive as far as we can, but we'll have to hike the last few miles. It's rugged terrain, Emily. Are you up for it? I thought about my sedentary lifestyle in San Francisco, my most strenuous activity being the occasional yoga class. But then I thought about the veil dial, about the legacy my grandfather had left behind. "I'll manage," I said with more confidence than I felt. We spent the next hour packing supplies: food, water, first aid kit, camping gear. Uncle Robert also packed some items I'd never seen before: strange devices that looked like a cross between compasses and Geiger counters, vials of shimmering liquid, and small pouches of what looked like sand but glowed faintly in the dark. "Veil detection equipment," he explained when he caught me looking. "And some protective measures just in case." Just in case of what? I wondered, but didn't ask. By mid-morning we were on the road, Uncle Robert's battered pickup truck eating up the miles. The scenery was breathtaking: vast expanses of tundra, dense forests, and always, in the distance, the looming presence of the mountains. As we drove, Uncle Robert filled me in on more of our family history. He told me about our ancestors who had been part of the custodians of the veil for generations, about the sacrifices they had made to keep the world safe from things beyond human comprehension. "Your grandfather was one of the best," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "He had a way of sensing the veil that was almost unheard of. That's why they entrusted him with guarding one of the most important nexus points. And now that responsibility falls to us?" I said quietly, the weight of it all starting to sink in. Uncle Robert nodded gravely. "To you, Emily. I'm getting too old for this. Your grandfather always said the gift would manifest strongly in you." I fell silent, watching the landscape rush by outside the window. The idea that I had some sort of supernatural gift was still hard to swallow. I was Emily Chen, software engineer and cat mom, not some chosen one with mystical powers. As the day wore on, the road became rougher, winding through increasingly wild terrain. Finally, Uncle Robert pulled off onto a barely visible track that led into a dense forest. "This is as far as we can go by car," he said, killing the engine. "We'll have to hike from here." We shouldered our packs, heavy with supplies and mysterious equipment. Uncle Robert took a moment to consult a compass-like device that I assumed was another piece of veil-detecting technology. "The energy's getting stronger," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "We're on the right track." The hike was grueling. The forest floor was uneven, riddled with exposed roots and hidden dips. I stumbled more times than I could count, my muscles protesting with every step. But as we pushed deeper into the wilderness, something strange began to happen. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the light filtering through the canopy. But as we continued, I couldn't deny it any longer. The forest around us seemed to be shifting. Colors became more vivid, shadows deeper. Out of the corner of my eye, I could swear I saw shapes moving among the trees, there and gone in an instant. "Uncle Robert," I panted, pausing to catch my breath. "Is it just me, or does something feel off?" He stopped, turning to face me with a mix of concern and excitement in his eyes. "You can feel it, can't you? The veil is thin here. What you're experiencing is the bleed-through of energies from the other side." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool forest air. "Is it dangerous?" "Not inherently," he replied, resuming our trek. "But it means we need to be cautious. The thinner the veil, the easier it is for things to slip through, in both directions." As if to emphasize his point, a sound echoed through the forest, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, my heart pounding. "What was that?" I whispered. Uncle Robert's face was grim. "Nothing from this world. Come on, we need to keep moving." We picked up our pace, pushing through the underbrush with renewed urgency. The feeling of otherworldliness grew stronger with each step. The trees seemed to twist into impossible shapes, their bark shimmering with an inner light. Flowers bloomed and withered in seconds, their petals scattering on a wind I couldn't feel. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, the forest suddenly opened up into a small clearing. And there, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, was a sight that took my breath away. Rising from the forest floor was a formation of rocks unlike anything I'd ever seen. They jutted from the ground at impossible angles, their surfaces smooth and faceted like enormous gemstones. As the sunlight hit them, they seemed to ignite from within, glowing with a fierce, cold fire. The frozen flame. Uncle Robert breathed, his voice filled with awe. We approached the formation cautiously. Up close, I could see that the rocks were covered in intricate patterns, swirls and spirals that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Now what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Uncle Robert pulled out the veil dial. Its needle was spinning wildly, faster than I'd ever seen it move. "Now," he said, "we find the key." He began to circle the rock formation, his eyes darting between the veil dial and the patterns on the stones. I followed, my fingers tracing the cool, smooth surface of the rocks. As I did, I felt a strange tingling in my fingertips, as if the stone was vibrating at a frequency just beyond my perception. Suddenly, my hand brushed over a section of rock that felt different, warmer, almost alive. I paused, pressing my palm flat against it. "Uncle Robert," I called out. "I think I found something." He hurried over, his eyes widening as he saw where my hand was. "Emily," he said softly, "look at the stone." I glanced down and gasped. Where my hand touched the rock, the patterns were shifting, realigning themselves into a new configuration. As we watched, a seam appeared in the seemingly solid stone, widening to reveal a small cavity. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like starlight, was a small, intricately carved piece of obsidian. It was no larger than a playing card, but as Uncle Robert carefully lifted it out, I could feel the power radiating from it. "The first key," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "You did it, Emily. You found it." Before I could respond, that otherworldly growl echoed through the clearing again, closer this time, much closer. Uncle Robert's face paled. "We need to leave," he said urgently, carefully wrapping the obsidian key in a piece of cloth and tucking it into his pack. "Now." As we turned to flee, I caught a glimpse of something moving at the edge of the clearing. It was like a tear in the fabric of reality, a shimmering rift through which I could see something. Something with too many eyes and limbs that bent in ways that made my mind recoil. "Run!" Uncle Robert shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me back towards the forest. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces as we ran. Behind us, I could hear the sound of pursuit, a slithering, scraping noise that sent waves of primal fear through my body. As we ran, Uncle Robert fumbled in his pack, pulling out one of the pouches of glowing sand I'd seen earlier. "When I say now," he panted, "I need you to think about safety, about protection. Can you do that?" I nodded, too out of breath to speak. We burst out of the tree line onto the rough track where we'd left the truck. The sun had set, leaving us in the eerie twilight of the Alaskan summer night. "Now!" Uncle Robert shouted, skidding to a stop and turning to face the forest. I closed my eyes, concentrating with all my might on the idea of safety, of a barrier between us and whatever was chasing us. I felt a surge of something course through me, like an electric current, but somehow more. Uncle Robert flung the pouch of sand into the air. Instead of falling to the ground, it hung suspended, forming a shimmering curtain between us and the forest. Just in time, a dark, writhing mass slammed into the barrier, letting out a shriek that made my bones vibrate. "Go, go!" Uncle Robert yelled, pushing me towards the truck. We scrambled in, and Uncle Robert gunned the engine, tires spinning in the dirt before finding purchase. As we sped away, I looked in the side mirror. The shimmering barrier was fading, and through it, I could see shapes. Impossible shapes that hurt my eyes to look at, moving in ways that defied physics. I turned away, my heart pounding, as Uncle Robert drove us back toward civilization. We had the key, but at what cost? And what new dangers had we unleashed? As the adrenaline began to fade, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. There was no going back to my quiet existence in San Francisco, not now that I had seen what lurked beyond the veil. Whether I liked it or not, I was part of this now. Part of an ancient legacy, a cosmic struggle between light and dark. And somewhere out there, 2 more keys were waiting to be found. The drive back to Uncle Robert's cabin was tense and silent. My mind was reeling, trying to process everything that had happened. The frozen flame, the key, the thing that had chased us. It all felt like a dream. Or a nightmare. As we pulled up to the cabin, I noticed something was off. The door was slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. "Uncle Robert," I said, my voice tight with fear. "Did you leave the door open when we left?" His face hardened. "No," he said grimly, reaching under his seat and pulling out what looked like an antique revolver. "Stay in the car. If anything happens, drive. There's a safe house marked on the map in the glove compartment." Before I could protest, he was out of the truck, moving cautiously towards the cabin. I watched, my heart in my throat, as he disappeared inside. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Uncle Robert reappeared in the doorway, his face pale. "It's clear," he called out. "But you need to see this." Hesitantly, I got out of the truck and made my way to the cabin. As soon as I stepped inside, I could see why Uncle Robert looked so shaken. The place had been ransacked. Books were strewn across the floor, furniture overturned, and worst of all, Uncle Robert's desk had been completely destroyed, the computers smashed beyond repair. "They were looking for something," Uncle Robert said, carefully picking his way through the debris. "The key, most likely, or information about it." "Who?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. "The Shroud," he replied, his voice grim. "A group dedicated to tearing down the veil. They believe that by doing so, they'll gain unimaginable power. They don't understand, or don't care, about the catastrophe it would unleash." I shivered, remembering the glimpse I'd caught of what lay beyond the veil. The idea of such things roaming freely in our world was terrifying. "What do we do now?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Uncle Robert was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the wreckage of his home. Then, with a determined set to his jaw, he turned to me. "We continue. We find the other 2 keys before the Shroud does. It's more important now than ever." He moved to a section of wall that looked no different from any other, and pressed his hand against it. To my amazement, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a small safe. Uncle Robert quickly entered a combination and pulled out a thick envelope. "Emergency funds and documents," he explained. "And this." He held up a small leather-bound book. It looked ancient, its pages yellowed and fragile. "Your grandfather's field journal," Uncle Robert said, handling the book with reverence. "It contains information about all 3 keys, including the riddles that lead to them. I kept it hidden here, separate from his other journals. Thank God the Shroud didn't find it." He handed me the journal, and as my fingers touched the worn leather, I felt a strange sensation, like a jolt of static electricity, but warmer, more alive. The feeling lingered, spreading up my arm and through my body. Uncle Robert watched me closely. "You can feel it, can't you? The connection to your grandfather, to the legacy he left behind." I nodded, unable to find words to describe the sensation. As I carefully opened the journal, my eyes fell on a passage written in my grandfather's neat handwriting. "The keys are more than mere objects. They are conduits, bridges between worlds. In the right hands, they can mend the weakening veil. In the wrong hands, they could tear it asunder. The burden of their guardianship is heavy, but it is one our family must bear." I looked up at Uncle Robert, the weight of responsibility settling over me like a physical thing. What's our next move? He smiled grimly. We decipher the next riddle, and we find the second key. But not here. The Shroud knows about this place now. We need to go somewhere safe, somewhere they won't think to look for us. As Uncle Robert began to pack what essentials he could salvage, I flipped through the journal, my eyes catching on another cryptic verse. In the land where ice never melts, where aurora paints the endless night, seek the cavern of whispered secrets, where the second key gleams in twilight's light. I read it aloud to Uncle Robert, watching as his brow furrowed in concentration. The land where ice never melts, he mused. That could be referring to one of the glaciers up north. And the aurora. We'll need to go even further north, possibly into the Arctic Circle. The idea of venturing into such remote, harsh terrain was daunting, but I pushed my fear aside. We had no choice. The fate of the world, quite literally, depended on us finding these keys before the Shroud did. As we loaded the truck with what supplies we could gather, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, half expecting to see another otherworldly horror, but instead, I saw a fox. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its rust-red fur a stark contrast to the green of the forest. But there was something odd about it. Its eyes seemed to glow with an inner light, and as it looked at me, I felt a strange sense of recognition. "Uncle Robert," I called out softly. "Look." He turned, his eyes widening as he saw the fox. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "Looks like we've got a guide." "A guide?" I asked, confused. Uncle Robert nodded. "Sometimes, when the veil is thin, animals can be influenced by the other side. They become messengers, guides. Your grandfather used to talk about them, said they always showed up when he needed them most." As if in response to Uncle Robert's words, the fox turned and began to trot down the road, pausing to look back at us expectantly. "I guess that's our cue," I said, climbing into the truck. As we pulled away from the cabin, following the fox down the winding road, I couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and excitement. We were heading into the unknown, chasing ancient secrets and fleeing from dangers I barely understood. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The fox led us to a small airstrip where a bush plane was waiting, its pilot giving us a knowing nod as we approached. It seemed Uncle Robert had more allies than I'd realized. As we took off, soaring over the vast Alaskan wilderness, I watched the fox grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the forest. Ahead of us lay the Arctic, with its secrets and dangers. The second key was out there, waiting to be found. And so our journey continued, deeper into a world of magic and mystery that I was only beginning to understand. Little did I know, the greatest challenges and the greatest revelations were yet to come. The bush plane touched down on a makeshift airstrip near the edge of the Arctic Circle, the frozen tundra stretching out in all directions as far as the eye could see. Despite the constant daylight of the Arctic summer, there was a chill in the air that seeped into my bones. As we unloaded our gear from the plane, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the stark beauty of the landscape. The vast emptiness was both breathtaking and intimidating. "Welcome to the top of the world," Uncle Robert said, shouldering his pack. "The glacier we're looking for is about a day's hike from here. We should get moving." We set off across the tundra, the spongy ground making each step a challenge. Uncle Robert led the way, occasionally consulting his compass and the strange veil-detecting devices he carried. I followed, my mind racing with questions. "Uncle Robert," I said, panting slightly from the exertion, "you said the Shroud wants to tear down the veil. But what exactly would that mean? What would happen?" He was silent for a long moment, his face grim. "Chaos," he finally said. "Pure, unimaginable chaos. The veil doesn't just keep things out, Émile. It maintains the very fabric of our reality. If it were to fall completely, well, the laws of physics as we know them would cease to apply. Time and space would warp and twist. And the entities that exist beyond the veil, things our minds can barely comprehend, they would pour into our world. I shuddered, remembering the glimpse I'd caught of the thing that had chased us in the forest. The idea of such creatures roaming freely was terrifying. But why would anyone want that? I asked. Power, Uncle Robert replied. The Shroud believes that in the chaos of a broken veil, they can harness energies beyond human comprehension. They think they'll become gods, but they're fools. No human mind could withstand such power. They destroy themselves and the world along with them. We walked in silence for a while, the weight of his words settling over us like a heavy blanket. The landscape seemed to stretch on forever, a sea of hardy tundra plants and scattered rocks. In the distance, I could see the looming shape of a glacier, its blue-white surface glinting in the never-setting sun. As we approached the glacier, the air grew colder, and a mist began to form around us. It swirled and eddied in strange patterns, sometimes taking shapes that seemed almost deliberate before dissolving again. The veil is thin here, Uncle Robert murmured, his eyes darting around warily. Stay close, and whatever you do, don't wander off. We began to climb the glacier, our crampons biting into the ice with each step. The mist grew thicker, and soon I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The only sound was our labored breathing and the crunch of ice under our feet. Suddenly, Uncle Robert stopped. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I strained my ears, and then I heard it. A faint whisper, like voices carried on the wind. But there was something off about it, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "The cavern of whispered secrets," I breathed, remembering the riddle. Uncle Robert nodded grimly. "It's close, but be careful. In places like this, where the veil is thin, things aren't always what they seem." We pressed on, following the whispers. As we rounded a bend in the glacier, the mist suddenly cleared, revealing a sight that took my breath away. Before us was an enormous ice cave, its entrance a gaping maw in the side of the glacier. The ice here was different. It seemed to shimmer and shift, patterns and colors swirling just below the surface. "This is it," Uncle Robert said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "The cavern of whispered secrets." As we approached the entrance, the whispers grew louder. I could almost make out words now, but they were in a language I didn't understand. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. We stepped into the cave, the ice beneath our feet glowing with an inner light. The walls were smooth and curved like the inside of a massive geode, and everywhere there were reflections, but not of us. I saw glimpses of other places, other times, scenes that couldn't possibly exist in our world. "Don't look too closely," Uncle Robert warned. "Those are reflections of other realities. Stare too long, and you might lose yourself." We made our way deeper into the cave, the whispers growing louder with each step. The air was thick with energy, making it hard to breathe. My skin tingled, and I could feel my hair standing on end. Finally, we reached what seemed to be the heart of the cave. Here, the ice formed a perfect circle, smooth as glass. In the center, hovering a few inches above the surface, was a small object. It looked like a piece of crystal, but it pulsed with an inner light, casting rainbow reflections across the ice. "The second key," Uncle Robert breathed. I stepped forward, drawn to the key as if by an invisible force. As I reached out to take it, the whispers suddenly crescendoed into a deafening roar. The ice beneath my feet began to crack. "Emily, wait!" Uncle Robert shouted, but it was too late. As my fingers closed around the key, the world exploded into light and sound. I felt myself falling, tumbling through space and time. Images flashed before my eyes, past, present, future, realities that never were and never would be. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I found myself standing back in the cave, the key clutched tightly in my hand. But something was wrong. The cave was silent now, the whispers gone. And Uncle Robert? I looked around frantically, but he was nowhere to be seen. "Uncle Robert," I called out, my voice echoing in the eerie silence. There was no response. I was alone in the cavern, holding a key to reality itself, with no idea how to get back or what to do next. As panic began to set in, I felt a warmth emanating from the key in my hand. I looked down and saw that it was glowing brightly, pulsing in a rhythm that felt strangely familiar. It was almost like a heartbeat. Instinctively, I closed my eyes and focused on the pulse of the key. As I did, I felt that same strange energy I'd experienced before, the power that had helped me find the first key, that had fueled the protective barrier against the creature in the forest. When I opened my eyes, I gasped. The cave around me had changed. The ice was no longer smooth and reflective. Instead, it was covered in intricate patterns and symbols, glowing with the same inner light as the key. I realized with a start that I could read these symbols. They weren't in any language I knew, and yet their meaning was clear to me. They told a story. The story of the veil, of the keys, of the delicate balance between realities. And there, hidden within the story, was a message. A message from my grandfather. "To the one who holds the key," I read aloud, my voice shaking. "The path is not easy, but you are not alone. Trust in yourself, in the power that flows through our bloodline. The veil responds to your will. Shape it, guide it, protect it. The third key lies where the forgotten dreams sleep, in the city beneath the waves. Find it, and restore the balance. The fate of all realities rests in your hands." As I finished reading, the symbols faded, leaving the ice smooth and unremarkable once more. But the key in my hand pulsed warmly, as if in acknowledgement. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I didn't fully understand what had happened or what it all meant. But I knew one thing for certain. I had to find the third key. Uncle Robert was out there somewhere, and the shroud was still a threat. The fate of the world, of all worlds, depended on me. With newfound determination, I made my way out of the cave. The Arctic landscape stretched before me, vast and unforgiving. But for the first time since this journey began, I felt a sense of purpose, of destiny. As I stepped out onto the glacier, I saw movement in the distance. For a moment I tensed, fearing it might be the shroud. But as the figure drew closer, I realized it was the same fox we had seen before, its fur gleaming like fire against the ice. It looked at me with those eerily intelligent eyes, then turned and began to trot across the glacier. I smiled despite everything. It seemed my guide had found me once again. "All right," I said to myself, clutching the key tightly. "Let's go find a city beneath the waves." And with that, I set off across the ice, following the fox into the unknown. The third key was waiting, and with it, the power to save not just our world, but all realities. My ordinary life as a software engineer in San Francisco felt like a distant dream now. I was Émile Chen, heir to an ancient legacy, protector of the veil, and my journey was far from over. The journey from the Arctic to the coast of Greece was a blur of long flights, tense layovers, and constant vigilance. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential shroud agent, every stranger a possible threat. The 2 keys we had collected so far were a constant presence, their energy a low hum at the edge of my consciousness. I had spent the journey poring over my grandfather's journal, trying to decipher the clues about the third key. The city beneath the waves had immediately made me think of Atlantis, the legendary sunken city. But surely it couldn't be that simple, could it? As our small chartered boat cut through the waters of the Aegean Sea, I couldn't help but marvel at how much my life had changed in just a few short weeks. The Émile Chen who had boarded a plane to Alaska, worried about deadlines and debugging code, felt like a different person entirely. "We're getting close," the captain called out, his voice carrying over the sound of the waves and the engine. "You sure this is where you want to be?" There's nothing out here but open water. I exchanged a glance with Dr. Alara Winters, the marine archaeologist we had recruited to help us. She had been skeptical at first, but after seeing the keys and experiencing some of the strange phenomena that seemed to follow them, she had become a believer. "This is the place," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Trust me." As if in response to my words, the key in my pocket began to pulse with warmth. I pulled it out, gasping as I saw it was glowing brightly, its light piercing even the bright Mediterranean sun. Suddenly, the sea around us began to churn. The captain swore loudly in Greek, fighting with the wheel as waves rocked the boat. And then, to our amazement, the water in front of us began to part, revealing a shimmering, translucent dome beneath the waves. "Impossible," Dr. Winters breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. But I knew better. After everything I'd seen, impossible was just another Tuesday. "Take us in," I told the captain, who looked at me like I was insane but complied nonetheless. As we passed through the dome, the world around us shifted. The bright blue of the Mediterranean was replaced by an eerie, greenish light. And there, spreading out before us in all its impossible glory, was a city. Spires of crystal and opalescent stone reached towards a non-existent sky. Streets paved with what looked like mother-of-pearl wound between buildings that defied earthly architecture. And everywhere there was life. Plants that couldn't exist under the sea, strange creatures that looked like a mix of fish and mammals, and... "Are those... people?" Dr. Winters gasped, pointing at figures moving about the city. They looked human, but there was something off about them. Their skin had a faint blue tinge, and I could see gills pulsing on their necks. "The inhabitants of Atlantis," I murmured, the knowledge coming to me from somewhere deep inside, a part of me that was connected to this place. "They didn't die when the city sank. They adapted." As our boat docked at what appeared to be a marina, a group of these Atlanteans approached. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their eyes large and dark, regarding us with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. One of them stepped forward, a tall figure adorned with intricate jewelry that seemed to be made of living coral. When he spoke, his voice was melodious, with an accent I couldn't place. "Welcome, Keeper of the Keys," he said, his gaze fixed on me. "We have awaited your arrival for many long years." I stepped off the boat on shaky legs, still trying to process everything I was seeing. "You know who I am?" I asked. The Atlantean nodded solemnly. "We have kept watch over the third key since the days of your ancestor, Elias Chen. He entrusted it to us, knowing that one day, when the veil grew thin and the balance was threatened, his descendant would come to claim it." I felt a swell of emotion at the mention of my grandfather. Even now, years after his passing, he was still guiding me, still protecting the world. "Please," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I need the key. The veil is weakening, and there are those who would tear it down completely." The Atlantean's face grew grave. "We know of the danger. The echoes of discord have reached even our secluded realm. Come, Keeper. The key awaits, but claiming it will not be easy. You must prove yourself worthy, as your ancestor did before you." As we followed the Atlanteans into the heart of their impossible city, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and trepidation. What trials awaited me? And more importantly, would I be able to overcome them? The fate of not just our world, but all realities, hung in the balance. And as the distant sound of something large moving through the waters reached my ears, I realized that our arrival hadn't gone unnoticed. The shroud was coming, and time was running out. The race for the final key was on, and the true test of my newfound powers was about to begin. Little did I know, the greatest challenge wouldn't be claiming the key, but confronting the truth about my family's legacy and my own destiny. As we delved deeper into the heart of Atlantis, I steeled myself for whatever lay ahead. I was Émile Chen, Keeper of the Keys, Protector of the Veil, and I was ready to face my destiny, The Atlantean city was a maze of crystalline corridors and chambers that seemed to shift and change as we passed through them. Our guide, who had introduced himself as Naren, led us to a vast circular room dominated by a pool of water so still it looked like a mirror. "This is the Chamber of Reflections," Naren explained, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It is here that you will face the trial of tides." I swallowed hard, trying to quell the nervousness rising in my chest. "What exactly does this trial entail?" Naren's large dark eyes regarded me solemnly. "The trial is different for each keeper. It will challenge not just your physical abilities, but your mind, your heart, and your very understanding of reality. Are you prepared to begin?" I glanced at Dr. Winters, who gave me an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, I turned back to Naren. "I'm ready." As soon as the words left my mouth, the room began to change. The walls seemed to melt away, replaced by an endless expanse of ocean. The floor beneath my feet became transparent, giving the illusion that I was standing on the surface of the water. Naren and Dr. Winters had vanished. I was alone in this strange, liminal space, suspended between sea and sky. Suddenly, the water beneath me began to swirl, forming images. I saw flashes of the past. My grandfather on his expeditions, the founding of the custodians of the Veil, ancient battles against forces that defied description. The history of my family's legacy played out beneath my feet like a living tapestry. Then the images shifted, showing me visions of possible futures. I saw worlds where the veil had fallen, realities twisted beyond recognition, horrors unleashed upon an unsuspecting Earth. But I also saw hope. Worlds preserved, balance maintained, the veil strong and intact. A voice echoed around me, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Keeper of the keys, you stand at a crossroads of realities. The choices you make will ripple across time and space. Are you prepared to bear this burden?" "I am," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The water beneath me surged upward, enveloping me in a cocoon of liquid. But strangely, I found I could breathe. As I floated in this womb-like space, I felt a presence, ancient, powerful, and undeniably alive. "Émile Chen," the presence spoke directly into my mind. "You have come far, but your greatest test lies ahead. To claim the final key, you must understand the true nature of the veil, and your role as its keeper." Suddenly, I was no longer in my body. My consciousness expanded, spreading out across realities. I saw the veil for what it truly was. Not a simple barrier, but a complex, living network that connected and separated countless realities. It was beautiful and terrifying, a cosmic tapestry of unimaginable complexity, and I saw my place within it. The keepers weren't just guardians. They were part of the veil itself. Our bloodline was woven into its very fabric, our lives and choices reverberating across realities. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm me. How could one person bear such responsibility? How could I possibly be worthy of this? "You are not alone," the presence reassured me. "Every keeper before you has faced this moment of doubt. But you have a strength within you, Émile. A strength born of compassion, of determination, of the very human desire to protect and nurture. That is why you were chosen." Images flashed through my mind, my life in San Francisco, my journey to Alaska, the challenges I'd faced and overcome. I saw myself through the eyes of others. Uncle Robert's pride, Dr. Winters' admiration, even the respect of the Atlanteans. I saw myself through the eyes of others. Uncle Robert's pride, Dr. Winters' admiration, even the respect of the Atlanteans. I saw the strength I possessed, not despite my ordinary life, but because of it. My analytical mind, my perseverance, my ability to adapt, all skills I'd honed as a software engineer, now serving me in this greater purpose. "You are ready," the presence declared. "Claim your birthright, keeper of the keys." The water around me began to swirl, faster and faster, until it formed a vortex. At its heart, I saw a glimmer of light. Instinctively, I reached out, my fingers closing around something solid. In a rush, I found myself back in the chamber of reflections, gasping for air. In my hand was the third key, a small, iridescent object that seemed to shift between liquid and solid as I watched. Naren and Dr. Winters were there, looking at me with a mixture of awe and concern. "You did it," Dr. Winters breathed. "Emily, are you all right?" I nodded, still trying to process everything I'd experienced. "I understand now," I said, my voice hoarse. "I know what we have to do." Before I could explain further, an alarm echoed through the chamber. Naren's face paled. "The city's defenses have been breached," he said urgently. "The shroud has found us." My heart raced, but I felt a strange calm settle over me. I knew what I had to do. "Take us to the highest point in the city," I told Naren. "Quickly." As we raced through the crystalline corridors, I could hear the sounds of battle echoing through the city. The shroud had brought an army, and the Atlanteans were fighting back with weapons that looked like a fusion of technology and magic. We emerged onto a balcony at the top of the tallest spire. From here, I could see the entire city, and the dark shapes of shroud vessels penetrating the dome that protected Atlantis from the ocean above. "Emily, what are you going to do?" Dr. Winters asked, her voice tight with fear. I smiled, feeling the power of the three keys thrumming through me. "What I was born to do," I replied. "I'm going to mend the veil." I held out the three keys, feeling their energies intertwine. As if responding to my will, they began to glow, brighter and brighter, until they were like three miniature suns. I closed my eyes, reaching out with my mind to the veil itself. I could feel it now, a vast living network that spanned realities. And I could feel the weak spots, the places where it had begun to fray. Channeling the power of the keys, I began to weave. It was like writing the most complex code of my life, but instead of a computer language, I was programming reality itself. I mended the weak spots, reinforced the boundaries between worlds, all while maintaining the delicate connections that allowed the multiverse to function. I was vaguely aware of the battle raging around me, of Dr. Winters and Naren protecting me from shroud agents who had made it this far. But my focus remained on my task. As I worked, I felt other presences joining me, the spirits of past keepers, lending me their strength and knowledge. My grandfather was there, his familiar presence a comfort as I faced this monumental task. With a final surge of effort, I completed the weaving. The veil snapped back into place, stronger than ever. A shock wave of energy burst from me, washing over the city and beyond. I opened my eyes to see the shroud vessels disintegrating, their occupants crying out as they were banished back to their own reality. The dome over Atlantis shimmered, reinforced by the power of the mended veil. As the last echoes of battle faded, I turned to Dr. Winters and Naren, a tired smile on my face. "It's done," I said simply. In the days that followed, as we helped the Atlanteans rebuild and said our goodbyes, I had time to reflect on my journey. I was no longer the same Emily Chen who had left San Francisco just a few weeks ago. I was the keeper of the keys, the guardian of the veil, protector of realities. But I was also still me, a software engineer who enjoyed a good cup of coffee and scratching her cat behind the ears. And I realized that was the point. The strength to bear this responsibility came not from some mystical power, but from my very humanity. As our boat cut through the waves, leaving the hidden city of Atlantis behind, I looked out at the horizon. The world seemed bigger now, filled with more wonder and mystery than I'd ever imagined. And I was ready to face whatever came next. Uncle Robert was waiting for us at the dock, having found his way back after our separation in the Arctic. As I hugged him tightly, I felt a sense of completion. My family, my legacy, my destiny, all had led me to this moment. "What now?" Dr. Winters asked as we drove away from the coast. I smiled, feeling the comforting weight of the keys in my pocket. "Now, we keep watch, we protect, we live." And so, as we drove back towards the familiar streets of my old life, I knew that everything had changed, and yet nothing had. I was Émile Chen, software engineer and keeper of the keys, and my greatest adventure was just beginning.